In this section, we're going to get into flow-based Scrum. We're going to talk about how you're going to be able to take the 4D model, overlay it on Scrum, and it's just one example of how using everything that we've gone through in all of the other 55 slides so far, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next slides. We're going to talk about the Agile Manifesto, the difference between a project and a process. We're going to look real briefly at roles. We'll just do a quick recap and review on the Scrum Guide. We're going to talk about some of the communication issues that you're going to run into, and then we're going to get into the actual Scrum format and the Scrum process. So that's, and we're going to talk a little bit about vision and things like that. There are a few slides in this section, and I think I'd mentioned this, that if you see the little light teal colored dot or circle with FCP inside of it, comma, etc., that's just a marker to let you know you've already seen it. You might want to listen to it again. You're going to look at the Manifesto for Agile software development, including the 12 principles. I want to point out that flow is in alignment with the Manifesto and its 12 principles. We're going to look at the difference between a project and a product. And remember, when we talk about product, we're including product, service, or result. And then we're going to look at roles once again. That's going to be one of the repeats. We're going to look at the Scrum Guide, and you're going to do a quick review with the Scrum Guide. You're going to do another repeat looking at accountability and commitment, because this really goes to the heart of working with teams. We're going to look at the Scrum framework, and you're going to apply the 4D model to the Scrum framework and also VSPT. And you're at the retrospective, you're going to link back to the vision and mission and the strategy. And then we're going to revisit vision. Are you walking the talk or just talking the talk? By now, most of you should be familiar with the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. If you're going to be taking the certification exams, make sure you memorize these so that you have it down pat. And so basically they're talking about they're uncovering better ways of developing software. So remember, this is the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Now, you could put the word product in there, because when I talk about product, I'm talking about product, service, or result. And so software can be both sold as a product, it can be sold as a solution, it can be sold as a service. Software as a service is a big one these days. But anyways, so they're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and here are the 4 value statements that you have for the Agile Manifesto. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. And I could get into long discussions about each and every one of these, and we're not going to do that. And please note what they say here at the bottom. That is, while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So that doesn't mean that there's no value to the processes or tools. It doesn't mean that we stop doing documentation. It doesn't mean that we don't have contracts anymore, and it doesn't mean that we don't do any planning. Those are total myths. Okay? So just try to shake that out of your system right now. But these are the 4 primary values of the Manifesto. The next 2 slides are the 12 principles, and satisfying the customer, welcoming changing requirements, deliver working software. Business people and developers need to work together daily throughout the project, build projects around motivated individuals, and the most efficient way of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face. And then Working software is the primary measure of progress. So you can read these in detail. By the way, the source on each of these slides is the agilemanifesto.org. And so feel free to look that up. And you need to know these 12 principles and the 4 values on the last slide if you're going to be taking the test. If you can memorize these, you're well on your way to being able to pass a certification test. Agile processes promote sustainable development, and you should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. Remember what we said about sustainability? If you're working 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, that is not sustainable. You cannot maintain that pace indefinitely. You will burn out. That's just how it goes. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances your agility. And this next one is my absolutely most favorite because it is the epitome of lean thinking. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Remember the slide on definitions where it was an 80-20 Pareto and 64% of the features were basically rarely used, never used, or only used sometimes. Well, right there, if they had done simplicity and applied this, they would have maximized the amount of work not done. They wouldn't have done the bottom half of their product backlog. They wouldn't have needed it for their marketing because the customers would have been completely satisfied with what had been delivered. The best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams, and at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Whole point of reviews and retrospectives. Okay, and really that they're talking about the retrospective there, but the team needs to be able to get that feedback from the customer, and they need to think about themselves. How are we performing? And this is what we call drive in the 4D model, define, distill, deliver, drive. And what's missing here is not just reflect on how to become more effective. You can have great throughput and you can be delivering the wrong thing. I've seen that at many places that have been agile for a long time, where they've got agile down. They can do agile, no problem. Mindset, well, that's another thing. They hadn't really internalized the mindset. And so without a vision, driving what they're developing, they're completely missing here any reference back to, hey, do you check this against the vision, the goals, the objectives? What's our mission? What's our purpose? What are our values and attitudes? Are all these in alignment with this last one? And so this is what flow plugs, and because we emphasize vision, mission, purpose, values and attitudes, strategies, and goals and objectives, because if you've got the vision statement up there with your in your team room and you've got the team's mission up there and you've linked it to the organization's vision, mission, and purpose, and you've got sprint goals and objectives that are there for the team to shoot for every sprint, guess what? Eventually, you're actually going to deliver it. And that's why we reach higher levels of success with how we do Agile, because we use flow on top of Agile. And so if you've never seen Agile, you would look at it and go, wow, this makes a lot of sense. But it's not intuitively obvious. It's not what people would typically do. And we make it look effortless. We've been doing this for a long time. And so it's a lot harder than it looks, and it requires a high level of discipline. These last 2 pages, these 12 principles, take an incredible amount of discipline in order to be able to deliver them. Do not be fooled. It really takes hard work to implement this into your daily work. And so kudos to the team that came up with these 12 principles. And they should have highlighted vision, and they should have highlighted the level of discipline required to be successful, because it takes more discipline to be successful with Agile than it does to continue to mostly fail in Classic. Classic has a lot of stopgap measures built in that are there to offset and counteract the lack of discipline, both at the individual, team, and organizational levels. And so just remember, this takes a ton of discipline to do this well. As much as things change, in some ways they stay the same. Now, these days we'll talk about team instead of project, but more often than not, the teams are going to be working on something where they have a pretty clear start date and a pretty clear end date. They may or may not have all of the requirements, but they'll be looking at it and they'll be going, well, we have a good idea of what it is that we need to deliver, and we pretty much know when we need to deliver it by. And often the team has no control over contractual issues about delivery. If you look at, for example, old editions of the Scrum Guide, you'll notice that originally they talked about product, service, or result. And that pretty much aligned with the PMBOK guide from back in 2008, 4th edition, where they talked about a project as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So they changed the Scrum Guide later, obviously, when they found out that it was basically almost the exact same definition as in the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the PMBOK Guide from Project Management Institute. And so the only thing that's different between a project or teamwork these days and a product, service, or process is that the project has a clear start and end. That's the only difference. All right. They all use processes. They all have their ways of getting things done. We talk about product management, service management, process management, line management, operational management, support management, and so on. So when you're talking management processes, they still have a life cycle. There's a product life cycle from cradle to grave for product management, and the same for service management. Eventually you're going to retire the service. But the main point is that it's important to understand that really the only differentiation between a project and all these others is that the project has a clear start and a clear end. That's about it. And now you could argue with some agile efforts that, well, there's no clear end. That could very well be, especially if you're in continuous development mode and you're maybe Amazon.com or Google, where you're doing releases continuously. And so in that sense, there's no end. But then it's actually, you're into the other where it's ongoing process. So it's interesting to see how things have stayed the same and yet how things have changed over time. In this picture, I use the 4-box that we use in the transformation slide deck extensively, and we use it in this deck as well quite a bit. And you have the 4 different boxes, the individual, team, product, and organization boxes. Scrum roles shouldn't be confused with your title in the organization. Theoretically, a CEO could also be a product owner. Okay, a program manager could also end up being a Scrum Master. So, depending on the situation and depending on the need, the roles that you have doing Agile or Scrum are pretty well delineated. In Scrum, there are only 3 roles. There's the product owner, the Scrum Master or team level facilitator, and then the developers. So those are the 3 key roles in Scrum. And in this picture, they're all the ones in green. Now, the green dot in the middle, primarily represents the Scrum Master, a little bit the product owner, but primarily the Scrum Master, in that a Scrum Master should be able to work in and work with all four of these areas. Scrum Masters need to work with the team members individually, the teams as a team, the product owners, as well as a little bit with the organization in helping to coach the organization on best agile practices. Now, where it starts to get a little messy is when I've added in the yellow circle. And I've tried to do these circles in such a way so that, for example, the yellow circle really touches 3 of the boxes. So an agile coach is not a Scrum Master, but an agile coach should do everything and can do everything that a Scrum Master would do. And basically, it's building on the competence of a Scrum Master or team level facilitator. So the Agile coach is going to work more with the product owners, with the as well as the Scrum Masters, and the Agile coaches are going to also work with the Enterprise Agile coaches, who are that outer blue circle that work primarily on the right-hand side. As I've stressed throughout this video series, product includes programs, processes. It will include people like the program managers, the line managers, business owners, product managers. All kinds of managers will be sitting in this upper right-hand corner. And this is where this corner gets a little fuzzy, because if you remember the different languages, this box speaks both the language of management and the language of leadership, which is the lower right corner. The Enterprise Agile coach does everything that an Agile coach and a Scrum Master can do, plus they work primarily with portfolio level and up, working with the senior and executive management and the C-level, helping them understand what it is that they need to do in order to enable and to create the culture that will enable the teams that are trying to use agile and high-speed methodologies and things like that. They need to build the culture that's going to enable that. They need to build the culture that's going to create protected environments for those teams. They need to build the culture that values the team feedback. They want to build a culture where the teams are able to freely and openly discuss with the leadership what it is that they're trying to achieve. So it's both bottom up and top down at the same time. We're going to do a quick review here of the Scrum Guide. And typically in a classroom setting, we'd have a discussion about it. We'd use post-it notes and we'd put it up on the wall under these main headers to see what people remember. What are the 3 main roles in Scrum? What are the 5 events? In some cases, people use the word rituals. I've recently run into a book about rituals, and it was very interesting. And it took it from a human point of view or a tribal point of view of we have these rituals all throughout our lives, and that's a cross-cultural thing. And so they were trying to emphasize the power of the ritual. And so these events or rituals, I think it's really important to think about those and what they are. But there's 5 of them in the Scrum Guide. There's a few artifacts that we produce in the process. And then most importantly here at the end is what's your definition of done, okay? So we're going to look at these on the next slide. Do you guys remember what they are? Can you think about them real quickly here? What are the 3 roles? Can you name them in your mind? Can you do the 5 events without even thinking about it? And can you name the 3 main artifacts? Well, we're going to look at this on the next slide. The 3 roles in Scrum are product owner, Scrum Master, and team. On the next slide, you'll see those are in green text. Okay. And as we get further into this, we're going to look at the sprint planning, daily Scrum, the review, and the retrospective. Now, the review used to be called the demo, and it would be a demo of a potentially shippable increment of your product, service, or result. Okay, and so, but they've changed the name over to review because you're reviewing the results with your stakeholders. And then remember, the retrospective is, okay, how did we perform? How do we perform against the sprint goals? Is that getting us one step closer to the vision and mission that we're supposed to fulfill? The 3 artifacts are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the actual incremental potentially shippable product. Okay, and then the definition of done needs to be agreed to by the team, and it creates a shared understanding of what it is that we're trying to create. A very elegant way that one of our Agile coaches was able to describe how to use the 4D model, but a slightly different way. In many organizations, the executives, they'll just inform the team members and their direct reports. They'll inform them and expect action. And you really need to break this inform act, I'll call it an anti-pattern for lack of a better word. It's really something that works against you. And I don't know why the executives do that. They inform, they issue their edicts, and they expect action. Now, that's great. But there's a whole alternate path. If you want action, and if you want to find a way to increase real conversations and the value add of those real conversations, and if you really want the teams to commit to delivering what it is you want them to deliver, that's included in the sprint goals and product backlog items and everything that's included in the sprint, here's what's got to happen. And many thanks to Bob Geist, Flow Certified Professional, Agile Coach, for distilling and drawing this picture. It was just brilliant. Instead of going straight from informed to expecting action, the executives need to understand that first, do I have understanding? Okay, are my definitions to the team clear? And if they've understood what I've communicated, do they agree with it? Okay, so that's distill agreement. Okay, another distillation that has to happen after that is getting the commitment, and that's when the whatever level that you're working at, whether it's a portfolio or program or project or whatever, where you get the commitment is, okay, we're going to commit the people, we're going to commit the budget, and we're actually going to go deliver this. Without that commitment, they can inform and expect action all day, but if where the rubber hits the road, and in most companies that are big, that have monolithic bureaucracies, if I don't have the resources, if I don't have the people, and if I don't have the budget, you can inform me all day, but I'm not going to be able to act. It's that simple. And so if you're dealing with a large organization, this is a beautiful application of distill, deliver, of definition, distill, and deliver. And then drive would be the iterative loop coming back and double checking with the executive. Here's what you informed us. Here was the actions. Are you still in alignment with what we just did. So this is a really cool application of the 4D model in a real life project situation where we were repeatedly running into this information act anti-pattern that was really messing up the team members, the program managers, the managers who were in charge of allocating resources and budget. And so once we started walking our stakeholders through this, they went, oh, yeah, there are additional steps. We're trying to help them break that bad habit. If you've already been through your Agile and Scrum training, you'll definitely recognize this picture. And you'll see that they have their idea there in the product backlog. You have your sprint planning, you create your sprint backlog, you have your 2 to 4 week sprint with your daily stand-ups or your daily standoffs, as one of my friends from China used to say. And then at the end, you're going to do a review of the potentially shippable product increment. And then you'll do a retrospective after that, hopefully. And from that retrospective, hopefully you're double checking against the sprint goals to make sure that you're one step closer. And so for me, one of the things that's absent from this picture is where's vision? Okay, yeah, you could sort of argue it's there in the light bulb with the idea. I actually take the light bulb out in the next picture and call it out specifically as the vision. Okay, and so we're going to be talking about this at length now for each of these main events or rituals and artifacts that we're creating along the way. One of the first things that we try to do when kicking off a team is to do a product backlog creation workshop with that team. Hopefully we've done a couple days of training before we start with that team. We've now reduced the training down to about a day's worth because you can listen to this presentation and some of the other presentations that we have out there on Flow and be able to come to the class prepared to do exercises only on one day. And the next day we'll do the product backlog creation workshop in order to get the team up and running. Now, so in this first section for the product backlog, and as we said on the other slide, further in, as we get further in here, we'll talk about this, that the product backlog should encompass the entire vision of your product. If it doesn't, then you don't have a complete backlog. And so your vision and your strategies, everything should be in there in the backlog. It's part of your key definitions of the 4D model. This is D1, you're defining by creating the product backlog. And what's really important about this is everybody puts it in according to their own lens that they see the world through. So you got a product owner here looking at this with the sunglasses and cool goatee going, yeah, this is a golden diamond. And the Scrum Master goes, is that a blue ruby that's in a triangle shape? And the developer's going, is that a round emerald? And so they'll put those into the backlog. And this is really important for getting the vision distilled and defined and into the backlog so that you can move from concept and abstract down to a tangible, concrete product, service, or result. And so it's really important to understand that you got to get your product backlog right. It needs to be prioritized by value. And if you use some other prioritization, you might want to think about that. I've tried just about every one that's out there, and I still come back to what's the most valuable things to get done. We talk about this in both the Flow Certified Professional training series and also in the Transformation series about when the teams actually hit the distillation point as they're working together as a team. Once you've got the team up and running and you've got a product backlog created, then the team is going to get together and start to distill. And distillation is one of the few things that can stop groupthink. If you're experiencing teams that have slipped into groupthink, it's because they're not going through distillation. And distillation is just like it sounds. It's a pressure cooker where people come together, they have a safe environment, and they can passionately talk about what it is that they're trying to co-develop. And so over time, we saw that suddenly the product owner goes, well, maybe it's purple. And everybody goes, okay, it's purple. But is it a diamond, a triangle, or a circle? And as they discussed this and distilled the concept, they came out and said, oh, it's a purple star. Okay. So doing the sprint planning is distilling, creating the agreement of, from the product backlog, what is it that we're actually going to do for the next 2 weeks? We're going to create a sprint backlog via this planning. We're going to create the goal and vision for the sprint. Now, when a team has created a product backlog in the workshop, about 2 or 3 sprints in, suddenly they start looking at the backlog and they start looking at their sprint goals and they start going, what is it that we actually have to do in order to succeed? And I've seen many teams on many occasions suddenly move all the post-it notes back into the backlog, sit down and have a mini product backlog workshop right on the spot and start writing down, hey, here's what we need to get done in the next 2 weeks to deliver that goal and objective for the sprint, which gets us one step closer to that vision and mission that we're supposed to deliver. When that happens, then you're getting true distillation. And so these pictures at the bottom I borrowed from the Agile Warrior series. It's from about 10, 12, 13 years ago. And I still like the concepts and ideas because it really reflects exactly what we're trying to do with distillation. And you'll notice that we moved from vision and strategy to people and tasks. Okay. And so now we've got the right people, we've got the team. What is it that we have to do? What is it that we have to deliver? We're going to distill the plan for the sprint and create the sprint product backlog that we're going to work with for the next 2 weeks. In creating the sprint backlog, some of the teams will use planning poker. It's optional. And we actually download an app these days. And in older days, we used to create post-it notes with extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, triple X large. And that was when we were working with the product backlog and trying to size a whole backlog using t-shirt sizing to give us a relative measure, because these aren't absolute measures at all. But if you have a deck of planning poker cards, or if you use the app, I would suggest using the app today is one of the best ways to do that. For the teams that are actually using planning poker, it's useful to use the points just to get into the discipline of understanding the relative size of the work to other work that you're doing. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you can start looking at if the team has gotten to the point where they can actually consistently break down their work to bite-sized chunks that are consistent. You can almost do away with points and just do it based on product backlog items and create the charts from there. I had a team test this a couple years ago, a few years back, with some really talented AI team members, artificial intelligence, and they were able to do the points and then We started doing in parallel, showing them the curves of the burn-up charts based on just doing the burn-up charts based on the number of user stories that they were doing each sprint. And the curves were nearly identical. The teams didn't believe me that that was going to be the case. But after a couple sprints, they came back and they said, you're absolutely correct. And so at that point in time, because the team was able to break down the chunks of work down to small enough sizes that were consistent in size, they were able to eventually get rid of doing points, which saved the team a ton of money. Okay, so you have to balance the overhead of doing an activity versus the time savings. Remember, we need to maximize the amount of work not done. So if your team is to a maturity level and to a level where they don't need to be doing the points anymore, get rid of them. Because in the end, the curves are going to be almost exactly identical if you're just burning up number of stories completed versus actually applying some points to that. The curves will be nearly identical. Once you've distilled agreement during the sprint planning and creating the sprint backlog, then it's time to deliver. And even within the sprint, you'll notice that you have the 4D model at play or in play during the sprint itself, where you can have define, distill, deliver, and drive. Because even during the sprint, the team can be working on their product backlog items and suddenly they go, oh, we forgot something. And so then the Scrum Master and the product owner have some choices to make, and we won't go into that here. But typically it's between the define, distill, and deliver portion. In between the deliver and drive portion, almost without exception, you're going to have a little hiccup where somebody says, oh, by the way. And so when that happens, you're experiencing the 4D model in real life. But hopefully, if you've done the first two parts correctly, the definitions part and the distillation part, and you've distilled agreement, then as you see at the bottom of the screen here, you've got the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the developers all going, we're delivering a purple star. And so if you're using points or tracking the number of product backlog items completed during the sprint, depending on how you want to do that, you might do a burn down chart. I prefer burn up charts for many different reasons. We won't go into that here. If you want to know why, I think I mentioned that in the reporting part of the flow transformation series. So if you want more on that, go there. And we do use the Kanban boards. Sometimes we'll use swim lanes. It depends. You can color code the post-it notes depending on your needs, so you can customize that. And so that's basically what you're going to be doing every day. But the main thing is that we're still in the VSPT, we're still in the P and the T with the people and tasks. And for the daily Scrum or stand-up or stand-off, as my friend from China used to like to say, you can be doing those every day. And it's really tough to keep the discipline there. A lot of teams I've noticed, especially in environments where there's a lot of resistance, this is one of the first things to go. This is one of the first disciplines to go. This is a daily ritual or, ceremony, whatever you want to call it, that is really powerful. And I remember one of the executives was horrified that in a meeting they were basically told to be quiet. They used a little bit more colorful language, but the idea is that the stakeholders are allowed to be there. They are not allowed to participate in the daily stand-up. So depending on the context, we need to help the executives understand that depending on the type of meeting, if you're using Agile, you might not be able to speak up. You can have a chat with the team afterwards. But during that meeting, that time is protected. So we're continuing to go through the Scrum process, and we're overlaying the leadership framework with that to help keep the team on target, on focus, so that they can focus and deliver. The last part during the sprint is the sprint review, and after that the team will probably do a retrospective. But this is the point in time where you take that potentially shippable product increment and you look at it and you go, okay, how does this align to the sprint goal? How does this align to the vision and the strategy and the mission and the purpose of what we're trying to create for the organization? And so now you're coming full circle in the 4D model to drive. And you're going to drive to success with as many iterations as you need in order to be able to deliver what it is that you're trying to deliver, whether it's a product, service, or result. Okay. And you'll notice that I included the cascading vision there. Out of the retrospective, you should be getting items that you may want to communicate back up the food chain. And that's the link back, and that's the power of the dominoes. Those videos are in the FCP training that's online here on YouTube. And you can see that just a little domino can knock over a really huge block as you go up the succession. So the team should choose maybe one retrospective item per quarter and communicate that back up. Because if the executive has 100 teams that's working for them, they all have 10 items that are just must-have items, the executive's going to get 1,000 items that they're supposed to work with in their backlog. That's not going to happen. So you need to be able to choose that one thing that will make the most difference. And we go through the power of the one thing in the Flow Certified Professional Training video series. So, but it's really important here, coming out of the retrospective, which is in addition to the sprint review, you need to be able to make that link back and do the link back going up the food chain. And a company that can do that well is going to tear up the market. So this is what it looks like end to end, where you have your definitions, where you've got the product owner, Scrum Master, and the developer on the team all thinking different things, even though they might be using the exact same words. And they're looking at that and they're thinking, oh my, okay, well, let's put it in the backlog. And then through the iterative sprint planning, sprint after sprint after sprint, as those sprint backlogs are created and everybody starts agreeing on, so they've distilled agreement, when they are agreeing on what it is that they're going to deliver, when they go to delivery, okay, D3, deliver, in those sprints, in those daily work that they're doing down at the people task level, at the end of the sprint, you bring it back full circle, making sure that what you just produced in the way of incremental product, service, or result, that it actually is matching up to the sprint goal and ultimately to the vision for the product or service or result that you're trying to deliver. This is really powerful. This is how you apply leadership to Scrum, or for that matter, pretty much any Agile methodology, since over 70% of all Agile is Scrum. This covers 70% of all Agile. And in the cases where you're doing Kanban or you might be doing XP, The 4D model might look a little bit different, overlaying those models, but it still works. And this is why the vision is so important. And I already said this at the beginning. The product backlog should encompass the entire vision for the product. And Ted and I have taught that for 25 years. And so this is the same picture. I drew it on a flip chart. You'll see that we have vision strategy with the disconnect lines here. This is actually probably drawn a little bit better. People, tasks, and then back to vision and strategy. And you'll see it all begins with the vision. You got your big product backlog, you got your team. They're distilling the sprint backlog via sprint planning. You go to delivery and you do your 2 to 4 week increments with your daily Scrum meetings or daily standoffs. And you end up with your incremental product, service, or result. And it could be potentially shippable and all those good things. And then you do the sprint review and the sprint retro. And both the review and the retro need to tie you back to the sprint goals and to the vision. If you're not linking it back to the vision, then you could be able to deliver things quickly and still be delivering the wrong thing. This is exactly what happened with one of the customers that I worked with in the last couple of years, where they'd been using Agile for 9, almost 10 years. They were trained by the best. And yet, they were able to get things out the door quickly, but the teams were getting demoralized and discouraged because, yes, they were getting things quickly out the door, but what they were getting quickly out the door was wrong. And so if you go back to the flow, anti-flow slide that we talked about many videos ago, they were down in the right-hand corner where they were able to just shoot things out the door lightning fast, but the vision was wrong or the vision was unclear. And so they were delivering the wrong things often, more often than they should. And so it began a downward spiral, and we were brought in to help with the reboot and try to breathe some life back into the teams and back into the organization. But that organization did not embrace the fact that down in that organization corner of the box that we've used so many times, we did surveys and we did interviews and we gathered all the information, and it was stunning. Almost all of the work that needed to be done was down in the organization box. But instead of the executives taking that and being serious about it and saying, oh, we need to change. Ooh, this is a big backlog. Instead of doing that, they delegated it out. And you want to know what happened? Yeah, you're right. Absolutely nothing, because the minute that they delegated it back out, they violated the walk. That means everybody knew that they were just talking the talk. They were not walking the walk, that they weren't within the journey. And that is why people started leaving and telling the organization, thanks, no thanks, I'm going to go work someplace else, and hopefully they'll have a little bit better culture. And, you know, it's usually you jump out of the frying pan and into the fire when you do that, but it's going to take a long time for that organization to change when the leadership refuses to acknowledge that they are the ones that need to make the change. So you can have the best Scrum ever, you can have it turbocharged using flow, and you can be shooting things out at light speed, but if the vision is either fractured, missing, or broken, you're going to be delivering the wrong things and your teams are going to get discouraged, and it all comes back to leadership. And I don't know how much more we can hammer on that, but it really boils down to the leadership of the company. And I'm trying to encourage the leaders to look at, okay, look in the mirror and ask yourself the question, am I the problem? That's a tough exercise to do. Most leaders, frankly, don't have the capacity or the capability to be able to do that. But for those organizations that do have the leaders that are willing to go on that journey and make those changes, the downstream results will be stunning and remarkable, because we've seen that happen over and over again, that when the leadership is with and they actually walk the talk and they just don't talk the talk, when they actually get down in there and do what they're supposed to do and create the supportive management that needs to be there and demonstrate courage and true servant leadership, those are the organizations that are still going to be here, while every 10 years, 25% of the Fortune 500 is hitting the rubbish piles because the leadership was either unwilling or unable to change. So ultimately, the choice is yours as the leaders, but you need to be crystal clear about this, that it takes courage and it takes commitment to say, okay, I'm going to go on this journey. I'll do the change with you. I'm not perfect, but hey, let's learn this together. If you're already halfway to agreeing to do that, you're going to win. So it really breaks down to a very simple question. As we shared with the value statement poster, where every time an executive violated one of the values, the employee put a check mark next to the value that was violated. For vision, it's equally important for the leadership, from the board to the C-level to the executives to the teams, to not just talk the talk, but actually walk the talk. So the question is are you walking the talk for your vision? If the answer is yes, then it will be balanced like it is in this picture. When we talk about talk, we talk about true vision, or the stated vision, what you actually end up writing down, and that ideal to which you're actually trying to achieve. Okay? So, conversely, if the vision's not in balance, if you answer the question about your vision, are you walking the talk, and your answer is no, if they're not equal, then the vision is fractured. And I almost without exception, I can guarantee you that politics will arise. Basically, with a fractured vision, that means it's broken. Well, that means it's probably in at least a couple of pieces. That means you have probably at least two or more visions, which means, by definition, you have division. Now, this doesn't mean that it's wrong to have divisions in a company, because the finance department, they're not going to have the same vision as the marketing department, or the same as the operations department. They're all going to have different visions, but they all should link back to the overarching vision of the organization. 9 times out of 10, they're not. Okay, everybody's off doing what they think is best for the organization. So division isn't always a bad word, especially if you're talking about departmental divisions. But that also gives rise to silos and silo thinking and all of the different issues that we run into organizationally with all these different divisions and departments. So basically what's happened is the delivered vision versus the defined vision, we're looking at something that where the true and actual vision, the walk, is not reflecting the talk, what's been implied or even written down. So if it's fractured, that fractured tips the balance, puts the vision out of whack. That means that it's not agreed to. There's no agreement. The agreement has not been distilled. When you do not have distilled agreement, that will automatically lead to politics, and worse, compensating practices are going to pop up all over the place in the organization in order to offset the fractured vision. So this actually costs companies millions or billions of dollars a year having misalignment. And so as a leader, I would think that they would want to have alignment. At least if I was leading a company, I would want the people to have visions that are in alignment with the overall vision of the organization. Without that alignment, it's going to be a very bloody war. So in this section, we looked at the manifesto for software development. We looked at the Scrum Guide and the review for that, the Scrum Framework and 4D model in VSPT with that. And then we revisited vision. The application of this video in section is an example of how Flow can turbocharge the leadership of your Agile efforts. And this works the same for all other methods and frameworks. Flow is methodology agnostic. Okay, it doesn't matter what you're using at the team level. You're going to get better results using Flow, and that's the whole point of Flow. And so I've given you, this is perhaps one of the most concrete applications of here's how Flow works with XYZ model. Okay, and we just did it with Agile and Scrum.